Hello, and welcome to our Lunar Reflections podcast, where we'll be journeying with the moon while Jupiter is in Cancer. And each month we'll release an episode to coincide with the new moon. And today's episode is the moon in Capricorn. My name's Tara Stevenson, and I'm a British astrologer.
I'm Helen, astrologer from Scotland in the UK.
And we're excited to be joined by another brilliant guest astrologist today, Ilka. Hi, Ilka. Thanks so much for joining Lunar Reflections. It's a pleasure to have you on. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So my name is Ilka. I am a traditional astrologer, certified in Hellenistic astrology, and I'm also currently studying more medieval Islamic techniques. I'm kind of a student in that at the moment. My journey with astrology began in 2017, I think, so almost 10 years ago. That's the first memory I have of going on astro.com and putting in my chart details and just seeing I have more than a sun sign. What is this? And then after a few years of kind of casual interest, I became what I like to call an official student. And pretty early on, I discovered Hellenistic astrology and traditional techniques. And I was studying and practicing. And then I finally started consulting professionally last summer. So actually, my journey of going from only a student to a consulting astrologer ties in with Jupiter's entry into Cancer really well. So it's actually very good timing that I'm here today to talk about this Capricorn new moon that rules Jupiter and it's ruled by Saturn. So, you could call it astrologer good.
Yeah, wow, I love that story arc, and I think it's very similar to a lot of us. We stumble upon it, and then suddenly you're in this rabbit hole for years. And yeah, congrats on the consulting, and I love
Yeah,
that
thank
that's kind
you.
of tied in with the Jupiter and Cancer transit. So yeah, it does feel aligned. So well, before we dive in, I'd actually like to briefly reflect upon Jupiter transit in Cancer because we're about halfway through now, and it's currently at 20 degrees opposing this current kind of stellium, Capricorn stellium. So it's under a bit of pressure and it also shows up in this kind of new moon chart. So personally, like in reflection for me, it's been in my 12th house, conjunct my natal Mars, and there's been a big theme around deepening my spiritual beliefs and exploring my relationship specifically with the concept of fate. Zodiacal releasing pretty much sealed that for me, but also honoring my time to rest and having compassion for myself as well as others. My progressed moon is also in Cancer, so restoration has definitely been like a huge theme, preventing burnout, which is ever present in this late stage capitalism society we find ourselves in. Helen, I think you were talking about something similar. How have you found this transit for you?
Yeah, I think the Jupiter in Cancer transit has been generally very positive. It's been angular in my chart, as you know, it's in my seventh house. So it's brought a lot of support in relationships, and a lot of positive things in that area, sort of picking up where Mars created some less enjoyable experiences back in 2024 with that extended transit. I think all Capricorn risings probably know what I mean. And then it's been overwhelmingly really positive, and Jupiter bringing the Jupiterian good stuff, which has been really positive and amongst some other more challenging stuff. But of course, when any planet's transiting one angle, it's also opposing the other. So I think it's been interesting having it around my descendant, and positive things in relationships has been supporting me to look at identity issues and things like that relating to myself that have been coming up for more challenge. And what about you, Elka?
For me, I feel like it's also very closely tied. Jupiter's journey in Cancer is very closely tied to the Mars in Cancer transit. I feel like I cannot talk about one without the other because for me, Mars in Cancer opposed my moon. But it also formed a trine to a lot of my water placements. I have my Saturn in Pisces, I'm going through my Saturn return, and I have a Scorpio stellium. So on one hand, Mars in Cancer completely wrecked my chart health-wise. I had so many health issues and illnesses back to back. But then on the other end, this was all happening in my eighth house. Cancer is my eighth house. And I started working on setting things up to be able to, among other things, to be able to practice astrology professionally, which means dealing with a lot of like taxes, talking to an accountant, money stuff. And for me, because it was Mars, it was for some reason extremely stressful and complicated. But then when the Jupiter transit began, on one hand, it was kind of cleaning up the mess that Mars created with my health. So I found, for example, an amazing physiotherapist that I'm seeing who's helping with some long-term stuff. I also dealt with some mental health related things that I found more helpful. So it really does feel like Jupiter was helping with the damage that Mars caused. I'm a day chart, so Mars is going to be a bit more destructive in my case. But yeah, the Jupiter in my 8th house has been really nice for kind of reaping the benefits, if that makes sense, of the work I put in with Mars in Cancer. So I started consulting professionally when Jupiter entered Cancer and actually being paid and kind of being an entrepreneur at the same time. And again, dealing with taxes. And it's not the most exciting house, the 8th house, but it's still, because it opposes my moon in the 2nd house, it feels significant for my journey. So it's been nice.
And I like that almost it highlights how any house can have positive aspects, you know, like and the 8th house is no different.
Yeah, no, it does highlight. I think even the 12th house, you wouldn't expect, especially where Saturn finds its joy there, for Jupiter to kind of thrive. But I think you're both right in the sense that Mars, I mean, we're all still kind of reeling from that Mars retrograde.
Oh yeah.
Jupiter's just kind of swept in and just done a really nice job of just like, yeah, being mom and looking after us. And I just think it really does highlight why it exalts in the sign of Cancer. And it's definitely kind of what prompted this whole Lunar Reflections podcast. So it's great to kind of talk about that.
So, Ilka, I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about your natal placement and what your lived experience has been of that.
Yeah, of course. I have my moon in Capricorn in the 2nd house. So it's livelihood and possessions and resources. And there are many different ways that this has manifested for me. And I'm not going to lie, the moon has its detriment in Capricorn. Some of it has been quite difficult. But for me, I also have a difficult chart. So, for example, I have a Saturn square to my ascendant from the 4th house, and it's an extremely tight square as well. It's down to the minute. So I'm going to be feeling those Saturnian themes very, very strongly. And maybe somebody else who has a different kind of chart, it might not be as dramatic. But for me, the kind of struggles that are usually associated with the moon in Capricorn is, when it comes to self-care or your needs or emotions. For me, especially when I was younger in my teenage years or early to mid 20s, there was a lot of restraint, or I would even say quite literally neglect, like neglecting your own needs. And before I learned how to work with it, it was all this like restraint/neglect that was mostly born out of my own sense of worthiness and basing it on whether I'm performing well in the things I'm supposed to do, which I think, Capricorn is all about achieving your goals. And with the moon, you might tie how you feel in your body and emotionally how well you're achieving them. So it might be a bit more difficult. And without going into too many details about early life, I did struggle with my mental health a lot, and somehow I had no empathy for myself with these things, and I kind of just forced myself to power through things anyway. But I would say it always kept getting easier as I learned and I matured. And Saturn is all about time. People who have Saturnian placements usually say that things do get easier, or you're able to cope with them better as you get older. But I did have to go through this whole journey of learning how to actually love myself and treat myself well and look after myself. But it was always in very typical Capricorn moon in its detriment fashion. It was always either because of a mental or a physical health crisis. It was never really a peaceful transition of, oh, I should start paying attention to this thing. It was usually like, okay, you need to start doing this, or you will face severe consequences with your health. So it's not always going to be so dramatic for everybody, but I have had situations that I had to really learn from. But I will say, I'm now getting close to the end of my Saturn return, which, it rules my moon, so it's very significant for me. And this type of self-restraint and the sense of being very achievement and goal-oriented, it still exists. I'm still like that. But, after therapy and working on myself and maturing and growing up, I'm focusing that energy on things that are constructive rather than destructive for my life. And, I think once you actually realize what you want and what goals you genuinely want to achieve because you care about them, or when you're doing it for the right reasons, that can be extremely effective. It's a cardinal sign. So it can be really good at just going towards the things you want to do and what you want to achieve.
That's a really excellent start to this conversation, I think. And it also reminds me to have a bit of a segue on the essential dignity component as well, the more theoretical side of things, just for anyone listening who's not as familiar with that kind of theory. And so it'd be good to get both your take on that as well. But I kind of tend to think of it as, you know, that Saturn and the Moon, they're very almost antithetical, and as planets, they're almost as different as you can get in some ways, with the Moon being closest to Earth and it's connected to water, like the oceans, and so it's a watery sign where there's kind of emotional openness and comfort, whereas Saturn is that planet of struggle, and I think that came through a lot in what you were saying. And so when you get the two of them together, and it depends on the whole chart, it depends on, you know, the aspects and the house placement and everything like that, but there's going to be some difficulties with the Moon being in Capricorn, and we'll go on a bit later on to kind of talk about some of the stereotypes and misconceptions and things like that, which I think you've already given us a basis for as well. Tara, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, I was kind of doing a bit of reading about Capricorn Moon being the most understood moon, and this kind of need to seek to understand themselves and their own discomfort. And it kind of reminded me of what you said, Ilka, about, you know, how growing up with that moon was difficult, and how you've kind of grown with in time. Like with Saturn, it's not something that comes quickly and it's not something that comes easily. But Sparkly Cat talks about this useful skill of like social accountability, and like thinking about like where you fit in. I think there's this kind of sometimes sense of othering or isolation that can feel with the moon, especially when it's ruled by that kind of Saturnian feel. And I think, I don't know, the word resilience just comes up, and I know it seems like a bit of a obvious key word, but there's just kind of this stoicism of just keep going. And no matter what comes up at you, you've got something, some kind of reserve to kind of keep going. And I think sometimes that can be lonely in a sense, because it's about, well, who kind of looks after you? Sometimes you're the one that's always outwardly showing that kind of strength. And I was thinking about my friends as well. I've got two kind of Capricorn moon friends. They're both Pisces, weirdly enough. And I think, and maybe this is probably for later in terms of like misconceptions about around, you know, climbing the corporate ladder. And they have very different kind of lifestyles. They haven't ever really focused on that in that sense. They're much more focused on their sense of security and their family. And I think because people kind of forget that it's on the same axis as Cancer, and they just see Capricorn as this, you know, ambition focused corporate, and there's none of that softness there, but it takes a bit of time to get through to it. Yeah, Capricorn moons are definitely one of my favorites, and I think Sparkly Cat's right in the sense that there is a lot of misunderstanding. So it's great that we've got someone with like lived experience on the podcast that can kind of, yeah, talk to us about that.
Yeah, I think, I mean, this applies to all moon placements, but there's usually a reason when you look at a Capricorn moon and they talk about their life, why they are the way they are, because, you know, everything comes from your childhood, essentially, how your early life, how you grew up, your parents, your environment. Some of those things you absolutely had no control over, or even your parents had no control over. So these traits don't just appear randomly. And sometimes I see the stereotype of when somebody is a Capricorn moon and people tell them, oh, you must have had horrible parents that didn't love you, or I've seen this happen, somebody telling a Capricorn moon, oh, you will not be a good parent because you don't know how to care for people, which I think can be very harmful when we look at it that way. And also it goes into these, again, stereotypes that are just not true. But, you know, it can absolutely happen that if you're a Capricorn moon, you had to grow up in an environment where you had to become really independent early on. And that explains why you are like that as an adult as well. Or you just had to grow up really fast. Or maybe your parents did love you, but maybe there was something that was, you know, a part of your circumstances that they couldn't pay that as much attention to you. So it can manifest in so many different ways. And obviously we have to see the whole chart. We cannot just pick one planet or placement to explain somebody's entire life. But yeah, I think with Capricorn moon, there is a theme of kind of navigating this foreign land, which is also a theme for all planets in their detriment. I think this example comes up a lot where imagine you're in a foreign land or a foreign country and you don't speak the language, you don't understand the culture, you don't know anybody here, you don't even know what the number is if you need to call an ambulance. You know, like you completely, your resources are just not how and where they should be, and you need to figure things out on your own. But once you do, then you can kind of, you can learn so much along the way.
I like that. I've heard it referred to as being in exile as well as it being in detriment, and that really evokes exactly what you were saying there. Like, whereas in domicile, you are familiar and comfortable because you know things and you know what to expect. It's almost the opposite experience of that. And also that when you were talking about kind of adversity almost as a theme, I think that's very Saturnian, and it strikes me as a great vantage point to reflect on the Capricorn moon when you're just at the tail end of your Saturn return, and all those themes have kind of come around a full circle.
Yeah, I was just going to talk about resources. That's the word that kind of comes up for me. Especially you've both mentioned the word kind of like exile or being in this kind of foreign land where you don't have the natural resources. And then it's interesting that Ilka, your moon is in the second house of resources as well. So there's kind of like that double kind of meaning there. I think now would be a great time for us to just quickly talk about the new moon in Capricorn, and then we can dive into your chart in a little bit more detail, Ika. So this new moon is on the 18th of January, and I've just pulled up the chart for where I am in the UK, and it's a Virgo rising chart. And what's interesting, what I noticed was that Venus moves into Aquarius the day before. So we're going to have that Venus-Pluto energy in the background. And then we've got that tight conjunction with the new moon and Mercury and Mars. And it's interesting because we've obviously been dealing with this Capricorn stellium for a little while now, and Mars does give Mercury strength, so that, you know, in terms of like strategic ideas around our goals, or especially at the start of this new year. But also I'm thinking of like fighting talk, where, you know, cutting words, and while there's an energy to do this, I think there's also can be a draining energy as well, depending on your own natal chart configuration. I think that Mars in the mix can be equally active and reactive. So the word kind of moderation comes up for me when I'm thinking about this new moon. And, you know, as well as kind of preparing the ground for long-term projects or having this long-term vision, people might not just be looking ahead for the next few months. I think what's interesting is because this Capricorn stellium is ruled by this Saturn in Pisces that you've also already mentioned, it's just before it leaves Pisces for good, February 14th. So I was thinking about how we should probably look at both our Capricorn and Pisces houses because they make that sextile aspect, and just kind of worth exploring the relationship between those two houses to understand kind of like what themes might be highlighted specifically around this new moon. I don't know what either of you think about the new moon coming up. Ilka?
I was thinking exactly the same thing, that whatever is being started or whatever you consciously start around this time is probably not something that you expect a result from, you know, by next week. And yes, it's all there's so much happening in Capricorn right now. You have, you know, Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury. Venus was just there. Venus went through that journey as well in the past couple of weeks. And I feel like she might have helped a bit with the preparation to whatever is going on in each person's chart. And so many different topics are being pulled into this one house, this one place, which is Capricorn. And because of the sextile with Saturn also, I feel like, you know, sextiles are supported if you put in the work. And that also applies for Saturn as well, if you put in long-term effort for long-term results. And I feel like there is something here that is very deliberate. You know, it might not be as speedy or loud immediately, and maybe it's not meant to be as loud immediately. Also because, you know, I think today is the Cazimi, the Mars-Venus Cazimi, but, you know, apart from the Cazimi, all these planets are close to the sun and getting burnt by the sun. So a lot of these things might be happening behind the scenes. Even recording this podcast episode, people are not going to see this until when it's released, you know? So there might be something people start working on, or they have already started working on, that is kind of behind the scenes, or they're kind of subtly planning it. But, you know, the goal is for it to mean something long term.
I had some similar thoughts to what both of you have been saying, and, you know, thinking about the degree and just how tight that stellium is. I love your point about it being kind of combust the sun, and apart from the Cazimi, there is this, it's almost very close to the anoretic degree, so it's not quite in that crisis point. There's definitely not a relaxed, if there's a relaxed part of Capricorn, it's not this last Mars ruled term where there's almost this sense of like looking towards the future, thinking, building, planning, doing with Mars and Mercury there. It's like thinking about what we need to do. Mars is exalted and the exaltation ruler, but also, you know, ruling that term. So there's a almost, if not crisis, there's a stressy kind of feeling to it to a degree, almost a pressure. That's maybe partly a reflection of how it's picking up in my chart. This is all happening conjunct my ascendant, but definitely I'm glad of the minor grand trine. So we've got that sextile from the ruler Saturn, which is conjunct Neptune, and then we've also got the trine with Uranus in the late degrees of Taurus. So there's that kind of flowing interaction between all of those planets, even Venus Pluto, which, as you pointed out, Tara, it's still being picked up here, and as you pointed out, Ilka, it's laid the groundwork, but they're dissociate conjunctions. So again, I think that maybe echoes what you were saying about the behind the scenes-ness, where it's not as easy to discern when it's out of sign conjunction. There's a kind of the energies are merged but not fully, because there's those key differences in the sign environment, and it's so fresh. Venus is just ingressed and it's just entered its evening star phase, and so it's in this new phase of its cycle. So it does feel there's a really strong kind of cardinality to it, you know, being that late degrees of Capricorn, the start of something new. And I agree with what you were saying there as well about, you know, what comes of this time might not be easy to see now, and it might not come too quickly, but it is the beginning of something, definitely.
I was just thinking about also how this is all happening in the third decan of Capricorn, which also talks a lot about kind of becoming really protective of your resources and what you've built up, but also maybe a bit of a scarcity mindset, because you remember what it's like to not have those resources. So what you said, Helen, as well, about this kind of pressure point, it might also manifest. I mean, and Capricorn on its own loves to set a goal and, you know, go about achieving it. It's not really a nonchalant sign.
No, as we've all felt this week, definitely. It's been so interesting, like when work colleagues have said, "Oh, I'm so busy, it's been so chaotic, it's been so," and I'm like, yeah, it's that Capricorn stellium. I was just thinking how what you've both been saying about Capricorn kind of laying the foundation and it not being kind of immediate. Yeah, it's a new moon. Yeah, it's being ruled by Saturn, sorry, which is about to leave Pisces for the final time, and it's opposing Jupiter, which has been in Cancer for, 6 months. And it just feels almost contradictory that there's like this new start, but it's also laying the foundations of things that have gone before. And I think that is the nature of Saturn. So it makes a lot of sense. So I know we touched a little bit about misconceptions, but I'd love to hear if you, any that you'd like to challenge, any stereotypes about Capricorn, Moon in Capricorn. I think all of the moon signs or any placements have their stereotypes, but this one especially would be great to just hear your ideas, and especially for listeners.
Yeah, of course. The first thing I always think of with I mean, Capricorn is a sign, but I think especially the moon in Capricorn, which planets in their detriment, I think a lot of the times how it shows up, at least for me, I have a lot of planets in fall and detriment, is the overall feeling misunderstood or people misunderstanding you. So I feel like it kind of ties in well with just all these stereotypes. And one of those things is that Capricorn's focus and this focus on work and productivity is all inspired by greed. And the fact that they are so goal-oriented is a bad thing. And I feel like that's not true. And I know I have to choose my words a bit carefully here, because I know there's a lot of discourse around, society's obsession with productivity and late-stage capitalism. And, it all can be very harmful, and things like burnout are very real. And, people are rebelling against that as only doing the bare minimum, and there's more discourse around that. So it's a whole topic we don't have time to get into, but I feel like Capricorn often gets this stereotype of being this greedy, productivity obsessed, money obsessed individual. And, while in some cases, for some people, it might manifest that way. And again, you need to take the whole chart into consideration. It doesn't mean that a Capricorn moon's more Saturnian way of navigating things will be like that. And when you peel back all the layers, you will find that there's always a lot of intention behind the things they do and why they do it. It's very deliberate. But I think the whole point of understanding Capricorn is the reason why they are doing things. And I think it's also something that Capricorn moons have to learn, is they will probably not feel comfortable doing the bare minimum, which is fine, but you do need to find that balance, one, and two, you need to know why you're working so hard. What is your reason? Do you have a reason? Do you have a reason that's worthy? Do you have a goal that you actually care about? And that goal is not always going to be like money, 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 finances, career, all these things. It might mean that you just want to be a really devoted partner, or you want to have a family and be a really good parent, or you want to make sure that your house is in order and everything is structured around you, because it's also what kept you safe as a child. So as an adult, you want to make sure that things are structured in your life. So I feel like that's one big stereotype that, all the Capricorn moons I know, they don't really embody that. They embody the more kind of, I have a goal and I have something I want to achieve. And yes, I might overwork myself and overexert myself in the process. And I have to learn that in the hard way sometimes. But it's not a negative thing, I think.
That was also one of the ones I was reflecting on quite a lot, as well as that ambitious stereotype, because, and I think to a lesser extent, it probably applies with Capricorn risings as well. But I think in the 20th century, there was a sense of where almost Capricorn became equated with Capricorn sun, which is a slightly different kind of thing, and also with the 10th house. And so I think that's might be partly where we got some of that those clearly stereotyped views about career oriented and wealth focused and things like that, which it may manifest as, but much less so with the moon, and more in the sense of maybe valuing stability and security and duty and responsibility, and that will often render someone quite hardworking, quite disciplined, and often quite successful in whatever they channel those energies into. But I completely agree. I know some Capricorn moons. My mum's a Capricorn moon. I don't know any Capricorn moons who would fit that stereotype at all.
No, that is true. You've both mentioned Capricorn moons, and none of them that I know in real life fit that stereotype. So I really appreciate both of your kind of experience and being able to kind of challenge that, which is one of our things on the podcast. Now, I don't have any Capricorn placements, so I can't talk from experience, but I did just want to bring in really quickly Tim Burton, because I think this might help anchor people who maybe are new to astrology, because I think he has such, if you're familiar with his work, such unique kind of way of doing his films. He's a Virgo sun and a Gemini rising, but he's got his Capricorn moon at 28 degrees. And a lot of his films have these Saturnian themes of like structure, isolation, like the weight of time. But his protagonists, when you think of them, like Edward Scissorhands, Beetlejuice, Vincent, and Big Fish, they all kind of existed on the fringes of society, and they kind of struggle to express soft emotions, but they always were able to kind of channel them into tangible work. And I think tangible is a real key word for kind of Capricorn moons. Like, what can we actually see? Like, what is the physical output of my work that I put in? And I think, it often depicts sharp angles, shadows, skeletal figures. But he also has a knack for making the scary or dark feel safe in a weird way, like treating death in a like matter-of-fact way or comedic way, like very dark humor. And there's also this kind of repeating themes of legacy and the father, like there's absent or eccentric creator figures. And yeah, I just think Tim Burton's a perfect example of the embodiment of Capricorn moon in terms of challenging those stereotypes as well.
I just thought of this, another example of a person who has a Capricorn moon. I don't know if you guys know about My Chemical Romance. They were, personally for me, my favorite band when I was a teenager. And their singer, Gerard Way, he also is a Capricorn moon. And their music it deals with a lot of heavy themes, and he's known for being an artist that doesn't shy away from like really dark topics in his music and in the band's music as well, and the visuals and everything. So I think there's so many artists out there who I feel like it's a really good way to remediate those placements, to kind of go into those darker spaces and make something beautiful out of them. And yes, there's probably a lot of struggle behind it. But in a way, you can also kind of pay your respects to those struggles by expressing them in your art in a way. I also like doing that in my art, because I also like to paint. And, sometimes, those painful things can really inspire you.
Yeah, I love the idea of something beautiful being spun out of those themes in those dark areas or topics. I think the opposite, when we shy away or run away from them, can actually lead to all kinds of problems, and it can really impoverish a line of thought or inquiry or research or art or whatever it might be, or indeed life, if we're afraid to face that component of things. You know, these themes like around death and darkness, that these things walk with us through, they're part of life. And so I think that we've probably touched on what is actually a real strength of Capricorn Moon. We talked about earlier about resilience and things, and it touches on that, but I think there's something there in terms of that courage and clarity when it comes to difficult topics and that side of life. I had another one that I'd noted down as well when I was thinking of this. From time to time, I've seen people say that they think the Moon in Capricorn is an emotionally cold placement. I wanted to bring that one up to contest it as well, because I think, again, in my experience, it's just absolutely not true. I think Moon in Capricorn can be very loving and warm and kind, and they might channel emotions in a somewhat practical way. They might have a sort of sense of, okay, I've been here before, I know what needs to be done, I know this isn't going to come easy, so I'm just going to pull up my socks and kind of get on with things. I think that's real, and that's part of it, but that there's no sense of unemotional or cold or harshness that I think sometimes I've seen people say that they expect.
Some of the funniest people I know are Capricorn moons.
Yes, yes, yes.
And I'm not just saying that because I am one.
It's the
No,
dry humor that comes with
Yeah, yeah.
Capricorn. My mum's the same. My mum is absolutely hilarious. It's just the timing is perfect, and the dryness and the observation that comes in
yeah,
it comes in such a cool way with the perfect timing, just cracks you up.
yeah. I completely agree. And actually, I'm glad that you brought up the emotionally cold bit up as well, actually, because I don't know if I'm supposed to know this, but my therapist shared her details with me. So I know her natal chart, and she's a Capricorn rising, Capricorn moon, and she is definitely not emotionally cold. I don't think you can be a therapist without having
Yes.
that attunement to others and to have that emotional capacity to be that container. Um, and so yeah, I think it's a definite misconception, and I'm really glad that you've raised it.
One thing I also think about always in terms of, Moon in Capricorn and people being cold and distant is, there's usually a reason why people who are more guarded or more serious at first sight are the way they are. But I think it just means that they just need more time to open up or loosen up or warm up a bit. And also, I feel like also the humor component comes from, when you understand difficult situations, if you go through quite a few difficult situations, you learn that you need a bit of humor or lightheartedness to be able to deal with them. Anybody who's gone through difficult situations will tell you, like, you need humor to cope. So I think also the stereotype of Capricorn Moon being always so serious and distant and cold, it's not true. And for me, I have struggled in my own life with kind of not being able to access my emotions, especially when I was younger. I went through this phase of like, why am I not feeling things so deeply or intensely or etc. But it doesn't mean that I became this cold, distant, whatever person that doesn't care about others, and also what you said, Tara, as well about a therapist being a Capricorn moon is, I think, one of the most beautiful ways you can use any planet that is in a difficult position in your chart or any hardship in your life, because I think usually people who go through difficult things will want to then help others, and whatever lessons you learn, you can use it then to help. And I think that's a really nice way to do that.
I think it's the same with Scorpio Moon as well. I think there's
Yes.
that kind of emotional adversity and the kind of desire to use that to help others. So we'll move on then to thinking about progressed moons. And I was wondering, Ilka, how is your progressed moon at the moment, and how's this shown up for you?
I actually had to have a look because I don't look at my progressed moon that often. I mean, it moves very slowly, so it makes sense. So my progressed moon is right now in Pisces at 17 degrees. So it's 2 signs away from my natal moon. And Pisces is my natal 4th house. And what's interesting is my progressed chart, my progressed ascendant has now switched from Sagittarius to Capricorn, as if I don't have enough Saturn influence in my chart. And this moon in Pisces is the 3rd house of the progressed chart. So it's kind of tying the 3rd house, 4th house together. connecting the two for me. And it's very interesting because I feel like it also coincides with my astrology journey in a way. But it also coincides, so it met my Saturn in Pisces, this progressed moon, but it's also forming that trine to all my Scorpio placements. I have a stellium. So kind of the moon has been making the same journey that Saturn also has in the past few years. And Saturn rules my moon, like we said. So it almost feels like an extra layer to that Saturn return story. And on one hand, it definitely coincides with me studying astrology and then becoming an astrologer and learning and being with people and talking to people and communicating and all those third house topics. And at the same time, one of the things that were part of my fourth house Saturn return is moving back to my home country from abroad. Very fourth house topics, you know, going back to the country where you grew up and having your family close to you again. And I feel like the way this moon connecting the fourth and the third house has also been about me building up those daily habits and daily routines and friendships and, you know, classes I'm taking or places I'm going to. You know, when you move to a new country, even if you move back to your home country, it's still a new country to you in a way, in that sense. So you have to build up your life again. And for me, I feel like that home and building up the life and also studying an astrology is what this has been about. And it's at 17 degrees, so it's still a bit of, I think I have a year left of this moon in Pisces.
I think that's so interesting. Sorry, we love progressions on the podcast, and it's interesting that your ascendant has moved into Capricorn, so you've got that overlay between the third and fourth, because you've got the Pisces moon in the progress chart in its house of joy as well. So I can see why it's felt
Yes.
particularly nourishing for you. And then you've got that overlay of like your childhood home and coming back and like seeing it through new eyes. And I love that it's kind of tracked your astrological journey as well, especially with that Jupiter in Cancer kind of forming a trine at some point in the chart as well. Oh, I love progression stories. That's great.
And where's yours at, Tara? You're still in Cancer?
Yeah, mine's in Cancer. So it's kind of been journeying along with Jupiter. And I'm really looking forward to it moving into my first house and Leo next year. And I've mentioned before on the podcast how I don't know if I think it coincided with the Cancer in Mars. So it was like the Cancer in Mars that we all talk about was my Mars return. So that was the whole burnout situation that happened. And I think it was almost like the day it progressed into Cancer, I was like, okay, no more coming off social media, no more astrology, no more anything. And I'm still in that very much restorative, pouring back into myself. And my keyword is cozy. Let's just get cozy. That's what I'm always saying to people. It's just, I just want to be at home. And it's really nice because I've got a Sagittarius moon in the fifth house that wants to do all of the things all the time. And I can't always do everything all of the time. And so it's taken me a bit of time to get used to it, but I really do appreciate the Cancer moon and it's taught me a lot. And I think, you know, for people who are maybe new to progressions, it's a really good way to understand different types of moons. You really do get a good flavor of it. And is yours in, I can't remember, is yours in, where's yours?
Gemini.
Gemini, yeah.
Yeah,
How's
yeah.
that?
So I checked this morning. So it's now just approaching a perfect opposition to my Jupiter Uranus conjunction, which is going exact by progression. So I think that's led to talking about that desire to do all the things and do them all now, and that kind of almost scattered, kind of impatient sense of curiosity and interest that's been very much characterizing what it's been like. It's interesting that what always comes through is the overlay between the natal house and the progressed house. So it's my second house in the progressed chart and my sixth house in the natal chart. And it's been a lot about working and money and maybe changing careers and how will I make money as an astrologer. So I've recently started doing paid astrology work, but I've not gone whole hog. I still have a day job and I sort of do it on a small basis at the moment. And so I think it's been a lot related to that, but it's picking up the natal 12th house planets as well. So yeah, I think definitely for anyone dipping their toe into progressions, it's the moon sign placement tells you so much in of itself, how that links up to natal planets, and then it's the house positions of both the natal and progress charts. Just doing that, even if that's all you looked at, you get so much insight into the sort of era that you're in, or period.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, you can, and then what I love doing is looking back and just seeing like, oh, okay, I'm a geek. I've got a spreadsheet of all my progressions and what was happening, and you can really like go, oh my God, I moved house then, I got married then, and it's just, it is really cool to just see what happened, you know, before you were even into astrology. Um, so I thought we'd move on to lunar remediations. And Ilka, you talked about therapy and how it's kind of like a perfect role almost for Capricorn Moon because it's a way of kind of remediating. Have you done any kind of lunar remediations or worn talismans to kind of help with your Capricorn Moon?
I do use talismans and materia, but I actually don't have a moon talisman yet, maybe. But I feel like the reason for that is when it comes to the moon, for me, the remediation itself is how I care for myself. And,
Mhm.
you know, therapy is one part of that, but also, you know, the moon is shows up in our body and our physical needs and not just emotions, but also the physicality. And I feel like it's lunar rumination is really easy to practice in a way because those needs are always present. You know, from the moment you wake up, I don't know, you need to go to the bathroom, you need to eat because you're hungry, then you go to work, somebody pisses you off, then you're annoyed, then you're tired from work, you go home, you're hungry again. You know, it's a never ending uh, opportunity to practice that remediation. And I think even just practicing the act of noticing how you feel, what's going on, how does it feel when you're hungry or sad or you have a headache, but why do you have that headache? And these might sound really simple, but I feel like for a detrimented moon, it can be a challenge and it can be a really good way to practice. But also because I have a very Saturnian chart and I try to remediate by implementing the more constructive side of Saturnian habits. And therapy is one part of that because you need to be consistent, you need to be diligent. It usually takes a long time. Saturn loves time. Saturn loves a goal you're working for that's, you know, long term. And it's also, you know, therapy is one of those things that you do need to lean into discomfort sometimes. And I mean, for me, I also have a lot of Scorpio placements, so I'm very good with discomfort. But I feel like a Capricorn moon on its own will also be Capricorn moon will not shy away from that discomfort. But other ways that it looks like for me personally, because I have the moon in my second house, is for example, really being really consistent with like eating myself, which again might be really simple, but for me, just making sure I'm on top of my meal prep, it brings me such a sense of security. And if I'm not on top of it, I tend to start feeling anxious. And sometimes for a long time, I didn't really understand, like, why am I feeling so anxious? Oh, it's because I don't know what I'm going to be eating and when and how am I going to be have to standing on ordering food if I don't know what I'm going to be eating. So it's a whole, you know, journey that goes into your resources and your food. And it's the same with my sleep schedule, for example, just paying attention to how much I sleep and not neglecting that. Or I think for wherever your moon is, you know, it's also your body, just being diligent with your doctor's appointments or, you know, health related things. So anything that requires a structure or anything that requires diligence and maybe a bit of self-restraint, but in a positive way, not in a destructive way. So for example, forcing yourself to go to bed on time, even if you don't want to, but you do need to get your rest to feel good the next day. You know, that is a form of self-restraint, but it's from a place of love and not from a place of neglect. And I feel like that's, for me, it's the best way to kind of practice remediation for the moon.
Love that, and I think it's beautifully put that lunar remediation is something because our lunar needs are so ubiquitous and interwoven through all of our life and every day, is that it doesn't have to be very technical. It can be like all of those things that you described that are just kind of self-care. I think it's lovely for me with a fallen moon to think of that as lunar remediation, and that's almost like a formalization of what you kind of know intuitively, but it adds a constructive flavor to, I'm doing these things and I'm doing it for the right reasons, but this is also a constructive thing that I'm doing overall, which is a lovely way of looking at it.
Yeah, no, I think you've explained it really well in the sense that there's probably lots of things that people are already doing because it's things that we need to do every day, but we kind of take for
Yeah.
granted, and it's about doing it with intention. It's interesting because my daughter's a Cancer rising, and it's only through living with her have I realized how much that routine and structure of meals is so important to her. So, I
Yes.
mean, she's autistic, so she's going to have her structure, but her meals, she has to have it at the right time, and she organizes her whole kind of life around it. And I completely understand why, because the moon's about homeostasis, it's about an internal balance, and that can get thrown off from the moment you wake up all the way through. So, yeah, I think being able to nourish and replenish the body so that you can think straight. I think there's lots of studies that talk about the body and the mind and mental health and how it all kind of feeds into each other. So yeah.
I really love your example of your daughter, because when I was writing up my notes, kind of, I was thinking about like caring for ourselves and remediating lunar things is almost like you're caring for a child. Because, especially when babies are born, the only thing they can do is cry. And, they say moms are able to recognize, is my baby crying because they have a headache or they have a stomach ache or they're hungry? Like, you can tell the difference. And the same way in adulthood, we also need to tell the difference within ourselves. Like, and it might not come as a form of crying, but maybe I also have a headache and I need to figure out, is it because I'm hungry or dehydrated, or I don't know, it's hormones. And in a way, we have to reparent ourselves and become our own caretakers in a way. So I feel like that's such a good kind of metaphor almost for that. Like, imagine, sometimes I make this joke when I tell somebody like that I had my meal or whatever. I just go like, oh yeah, I fed the child. I am the child. But it does feel like that sometimes. Like, oh yeah, the child is hungry. I need to feed the child.
Yeah. No, that makes complete sense.
100%. And I think that leads us kind of nicely into the last question we wanted to put to you, Ilka, and then to build on is just around working with Capricorn Moon as a transit, both around the lunar cycle, but also especially in light of the new moon. What are any practical tips for working with Capricorn Moons?
I think I again like to keep it quite simple with the moon. And the first thing I would do is observe how you feel throughout each transit when the moon is in Capricorn. I feel like that is the first step, because based on your chart, it could mean different things. For example, I feel great when the moon is in Capricorn, but when the moon is in Cancer, I feel horrible mentally. It's in my 8th house, it opposes my own moon. The moon feels great in Cancer, but I don't. And I feel like the first thing that you can do is observe, and whatever comes up, if you feel like you really want to work on things and achieve things, then I would definitely make use of that. But I would also use it for kind of questioning and challenging whatever thoughts come up around maybe productivity, or maybe how you are going about achieving your goals and how sustainable that is, or how much work you are putting into things, or how much you are maybe trying to overexert yourself. Or maybe if it doesn't manifest as you feeling all this burst of energy, it might manifest as you just don't feel good in your body. And how do you work with that? How do you respect your need for rest? And I think this is also where the Capricorn Cancer axis comes into play, because you need, I think, Tara, you said like being cozy is what you need when you're burnt out. And I think playing with those two kind of energies of, okay, I'm feeling burnt out when the moon is in Capricorn, so how do I respect that? And it's sometimes easier said than done, but it's still something that I think it can be a very simple practice, but also maybe not so simple for everybody. So, but I would definitely first observe what's happening, what comes up for you throughout, months of the moon cycle, and then go from there. And also, I think there's a component with the moon in Capricorn in tangible things. So maybe your way of being cozy isn't necessarily, I don't know, listening to your favorite music, whatever. Maybe your way of feeling cozy is making sure that you have food in your fridge, because there is something tangible that you can rely on. So I think it's a journey to investigate what you need and what your body needs and how you can respect that.
Love that.
Yeah, no, that's some really good advice there. No, thanks, Ilka, for joining us today. It's been a pleasure and sharing all of your wonderful insights. How can people listening find out more about your work?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I am on Instagram, and I'm also on Blue Sky at 12 of Stars. I still do have a Twitter account, but I don't really use it anymore. So, and I also have my website, which is 12ofstars.com. And I do consultations, I do natal chart and soul return readings. And I'm actually also, with my Saturn return kind of wrapping up soon, I'm planning to start doing Saturn return readings as well, because that's also going to be my remediation for my Saturnian moon. So trying to,
Love that.
help others deal with Saturnian challenges.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that. That's great. I love the idea of a Saturn return reading. I could have definitely done with that when I had mine. So that's excellent
Yeah.
remediation.
I had
Yeah.
one when I was a few years ago. I
Ah,
had one. It was so helpful.
yeah, I can
Yeah.
imagine. Well, to our listeners, as always, thanks for listening and for bringing your own energy and attention to this topic.
And we'll see you next time when we'll continue with the moon in Aquarius.
Bye.